Hello and welcome everyone to the Dobber Prospects YouTube channel. I'm Jim Iacovone and I'm joined today by Victor Nuño, editor for Dobber Prospects and host of Dobber Prospects Report podcast. And today we're going to be talking about Macklin Celebrini. Victor, thanks for taking the time. Let's drop the puck here and talk the 2024 first overall pick, Macklin Celebrini.
Do it. I'm excited. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So let's start off with the your favorite attribute, and we'll kind of work our way into his skill set.
Well, there's so many good things. It's hard to pick actually because he does so many things well. But I think it's probably his just the way that he processes the game. He's such a next level thinker and that kind of I think his compete is kind of rolled into that too. Maybe we'll go with compete actually because that kind of bleeds into everything that he does because he's not necessarily the fastest or has the best shot or the slickest hand, but his compete level kinda makes up for everything else. It kinda elevates everything, every other one of his skills, and it bridges them all together in a really unique way that makes him who he is, really, and so I think, yeah, probably compete is what I would go with.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean that's something that's when you watch him live, I think that almost stands out instantly. Like he's all over the ice almost every shift. He does it in the defensive zone. It's all over the place in the offensive zone. So I think that's a great attribute to bring up and to have. All right, let's kind of move on into the passing, shooting, skating kind of stuff here. So how would you say his passing is?
Well, I think it's great, to be an excellent passer, I think, you really kinda have to have some amount of dual threat to you, or else
Yeah.
it doesn't really if everyone knows, like, as good as amazing as Joe Thornton was, everyone kinda knew he was always looking to pass, that kinda thing, and it was only later in his career when he started shooting a little bit more where that changed a little bit, but, I think the thing about Celebrini is because he's so well-rounded, he can deke, he's not necessarily the shiftiest, and he can definitely score with his shot. I think those things really make his playmaking well above average, whereas on its own it might be just, a bit above average, but I think it's quite excellent because you have to respect everything else that he does, and he's seeing things multiple levels in advance, and so that's helping as well. So, he's not a selfish player. He's not trying to, dangle through 3 guys to score. He's always looking for the best play, and I think that makes it all the more effective too. So, he's maybe, he's not like Adam Oates level or anything like that, but I think he's really, really good. And the fact that he is so well rounded elevates that passing ability a bit more.
I love watching players like Celebrini. You mentioned dual threat. I mean, this is a guy that can obviously score the puck, but I I I don't know. Would you say he's a pass first player?
I would say that he is. No, I wouldn't say that. I would say he makes the best play available. And I
Yeah.
would say not a lot of guys do that because I think a lot of guys you can say he's pass first or he's shot first, or he's going to try to dangle. But I think very few guys are like him, which I think is someone like maybe we'll get to this later, but like Crosby, right? Like
Mm.
he can really just pick exactly what's needed in that moment and he's going to do what's best. So it's hard to pigeonhole those guys because they aren't necessarily just looking for their one best attribute. I think that's what makes Celebrini so unique is that yeah, I don't think it'd be fair to call him pass first. I also don't know that it'd be fair to call him shoot first because he can do either and he will hurt you whichever way is appropriate at that moment.
So I love what you're saying, and we're gonna get to player comps towards
Hmm.
the end of the show. But you brought up Crosby, and something that's kind of been out there, in conversation. Obviously, Connor Bedard is, we'll see generational talent, but one of the best hockey prospects to come out, maybe since Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews. It's fair to say that maybe Bedard's the better offensive player, but would you say that it could
Mhm.
be fair to say that Celebrini's the more complete player? Is that possible to be without, having the offensive ability that Bedard has?
100%. And I would say Bedard is a no doubt better fantasy asset, and he's no doubt the kind of guy that you want for points, the guy who can score you points, the guy who can get you a goal at the end of the game kind of thing. But I think Celebrini not only can do that, but he's the kinda guy you win championships with because he does everything. He's gonna you can put him in any situation, he's gonna win a face-off, he's gonna take a hit, he's gonna give a hit, he's gonna make the pass, he's gonna score the goal. And Bedard, as good as he is, isn't necessarily gonna do all of those things. He might do some of them, and I think he's probably a bit more well-rounded than some people give him credit for, but he's not on Celebrini's level in terms of his two-way ability and just that defensive compete, and just being difficult to play against in all situations is a really underrated aspect. And so I think that's absolutely true for Celebrini. His all around game is so mature. I mean, to do what he did at 17 in the NCAA is just outstanding, and it's pretty much it's unparalleled, right? So his game is super mature, and I think sometimes when we're looking at prospects, we get really excited about the upside and the offensive potential.
Mm.
But there are very few guys who come along like this that you literally say, this is the kind of guy you can build a championship contender around. And I truly think that that's the case for him. And it's rare that we see that. I mean, McDavid, as good as he was offensively, still took, and I think some would debate, is still not great defensively. His
Mm.
defense is so good because he has the puck all the time and he's playing in the offensive zone. But is he great defensively? He's okay. So yeah, I think this type of player is pretty special. It's pretty rare to see this so young.
That's outstanding stuff right there. Well said, Victor. And so you mentioned maturity, and in my opinion, what kind of ties into some of that is hockey IQ. And Celebrini has a lot of hockey IQ. This guy's really smart, knows where he's supposed to be at all. It seems seemingly in all situations. Can you talk about the player's hockey IQ a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's such a basket of people throw that term around, right? It's like, what does that
Yeah,
really mean?
yeah.
And I think it's worth trying to elaborate because I think it can mean a lot of different things to different people. So what I would say his high IQ means for Celebrini is part of what you said, totally. He is almost always in the right position. It's like you look up and his teammate has the puck battling in the corner and you think, "Okay, where's the outlet?" And it's like Celebrini is right in the right spot. He's waiting in exactly the right spot. He opens up for his teammates. He makes their life easier. He helps them when needs to. He supports, defensively. He helps kill rushes. All of these things. But I think in addition, he sees passing lanes that others don't.
Mhm.
He puts pucks in space so people can skate into it instead of, trying to make a too difficult pass that might hit a stick or a skate. So he kind of makes the smart but better play instead of the safe play all the time. And I think there's something to be said for being able to make high percentage safe plays, but also those that are more highly effective. And he does that a lot. I think that he being able to anticipate what opponents are gonna do is another really underrated aspect of high IQ, and this is something that a lot of the best players do. They basically bait the other player into doing what they want them to do and kinda force them, squeeze them into a no-win situation. So they read, and Celebrini does this so well. He reads what his teammates are doing, what with the way that they're set up, and he pressures the opponents into a difficult decision. A low percentage pass or trying to dangle through a couple guys. And that's a big part of how not just him getting a takeaway, which is an individual skill, but basically a team turnover, right? Forcing a a bad a bad decision, a low percentage decision, and maybe not necessarily a bad. It's like, what are you going to do at that point? You kind of, you might dump the puck or something like that. So he's really good at reading plays, but also dictating how he wants the play to evolve, which is really a next level thing. And when you watch him play, you're kinda seeing, like, he's the one who's making the play happen, and the offense is kinda just like, the other team's offense has to really react to that, and sometimes, of course, they can break it, but it takes a really excellent play to make that happen, and so that's all part of also the being the difficult to play against. So there's a lot of layers to his high IQ and seeing the past 2 or 3 steps ahead, knowing where his opponent's gonna be, all those kinds of things are certainly part of his high IQ, and it's a really strong attribute from him as well.
Yeah, well said. So, I mean, the way you just described him, I'm looking forward to watching Sharks games next year. I mean, this kid's a lot of fun to watch. He was a lot of fun to watch at BU. I think it's tough to see all that, watching on TV at the at the rate of the speed the game's going. But when you get to slow down and watch some of this stuff on tape, or you get out to watch a game, or you watch a player enough, you get to see all those little intricacies and how he manipulates his opponent, like you're talking about. And that's really amazing stuff. Like, that's a really smart player. And you mentioned he's thinking 2 and 3 steps ahead in a game that's already probably the fastest game on earth. I mean, that
Mhm.
says a lot about this kid. So great stuff there. Mhm. So we talked about passing, hockey IQ, your favorite attribute. How well of a skater is Celebrini? I mean, he looks pretty good in college. Everything's going to translate to the pros, I guess. You went first overall.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't that's not a problem. The thing he's a really excellent skater. I think he's probably one of the best in the class. Not the best, but I think what's really interesting about him too is that his like I said with the other things, his compete makes his skating seems so much better too. But he's an excellent skater, especially in straight line. Maybe, some of his pivots aren't elite, but he's excellent in transition. He's not necessarily the fastest, but he's really strong. Like, he's not going to get caught on breakaways. Let's put it that way. If he gets one, that's not going to happen. And he has the speed to chase down, lesser opponents. But I think what's really unique about his skating is that he doesn't need to be the fastest guy to be highly effective. Like, that isn't a lot of guys are fast in junior or even in college, but that's all they have is they're just fast, and so he's right up there, well above average, if not, excellent in his skating. But it's how he uses it, it's how he adjusts his timing, it's how he modulates his speed to adjust to the speed of his teammates and the defense. That's really more of what it's about with him. And so, but yes, he's a really excellent skater.
Yeah, I would say he's one of those guys. I mean, I think the reason why I'm impressed with his skating is because he does all the other things so well. It's just like we mentioned earlier, he's just kind of the total package as a prospect, as a player. And before we get into player comps and who better to have than project his rookie year in fantasy, assuming Will Smith slots in at center with the Sharks,
Mhm.
does Celebrini play 1C or 2C, you think?
Well, it's tough because both these guys are brand new to the NHL. I think that however you want to label it, I think it's pretty clear that Celebrini is already better poised to make better defensive matchups against
Mhm.
the opponents than Will Smith is. So I do think that I think realistically what's going to happen is they're going to be the 2 and 3 seed, not the 1 and the 2 seed. Because I think that they don't wanna put too much pressure on either of them. So they're
Sure.
probably gonna give someone else the super high defensive minutes, maybe someone like a Granlund or Wenberg. But Celebrini is gonna get the next most all around minutes, and I think that's gonna really help him because you're not gonna need to worry about, sheltering him or whatnot. And Smith, whether he plays down the middle right away or slides to the wing, I think ultimately he's your more offensive center. He's the kind of guy who needs a little bit will and does and will need more of that offensive deployment in terms of like offensive zone starts, which will be great for fantasy. But in real life, it'll be more important to have someone like Celebrini there who you can throw out in any kind of situation. You're not worried about whether you're up a goal, down a goal. He's going to get the tap no matter what. Whereas Smith, I think, is going to get more of the okay, we're in the offensive zone and the team is tired. I just ice the puck. Let's put Will Smith's line out there, kind of thing. So I think I mean, it's going to be a great choice to have for the Sharks down the road, like which one of these lines they put out there. Because I do think they probably won't be on the same line for the most part, even though they may play some together, certainly on the power play and stuff like that. But that's how I think that they'll use them a little bit more. And this year, I think part of the reason they brought in they kept Granlund and they brought in Wenberg and guys like that was to eat up some of those defensive minutes. And however you want to label them, I think that that's how they're going to use those two guys.
Great stuff. All right, so now let's get to the part I'm sure the viewers are dying to hear. Do you have a player comp, an NHL player comp for Macklin Celebrini?
Yeah, I think that well, I mentioned Crosby, and the reason I think he's kinda like Crosby is, in particular, his drive. Like, the thing about Crosby was always that he was so naturally gifted and talented, but he worked so hard at so many different aspects of his game. I remember early on in his career, they're like, "This guy can't win a faceoff." So he went home and, took, like, thousands of faceoffs over the summer and came back, and he was one of the best in the league after that. And then he's like, "Oh, his backhand isn't that good. His forehand's good, but his backhand's good." So he went home and did that. I feel like Celebrini is gonna be that kinda guy. Just like after the draft, how he was supposed to go home and spend time with his family, and he came to the Bay Area and started practicing because he wanted to be ready for the for the rookie tournament, for the prospects camp. So, that kinda stuff, and you've heard that all throughout his junior career and his college career. So I think he's that kinda guy that's just gonna the level of detail. I don't know that he has, that type of upside as we're talking about a Hall of Famer. Like, it's tough to put that on the young man. I don't wanna necessarily do that to him, but I've always kinda also thought that he's a blend of, like, Taves and Kane as well, because I think he's kinda more like Taves in the sense that he's your two-way reliable center, but I think he has a little bit more offensive upside than Taves. He's got a little bit of that crafty shiftiness that Patty Kane has, but I think if you just looked at those 2, also Hall of Famers. But, I think you'd probably lean more towards Taves because he's just gonna be that super reliable, set your watch to it, and his floor is just so high, like, he's gonna be a guy who's, like, very easily gonna hit 60, 70 points on the routine, but has upside for, 80, 90, that kinda thing. It's gonna depend on the team around him in this situation, but those are the kind of guys that I see him as, the really well-rounded two-way centers, like a Taves and Crosby. It's somewhere in between there depending on how well the offense translates, which I think it's gonna translate pretty well.
I couldn't agree with you more. I see exactly what you said, a 60, 70 point floor guy, and I don't think it's necessarily unfair. Like he has like the Crosby mentality, but maybe not the Crosby. I mean, Sidney Crosby's 1 in a million, right? He didn't so he can be I don't even wanna say a poor man's Crosby because I feel like that doesn't even really do him due diligence, right? Like, he's got the same mentality of as
Yeah.
Crosby, and sure, he'll put up 60, 70 points a year at least, and then, if he's in the right situation, which it looks like the Sharks are building correctly out there, he's a lock for a point per game. I totally agree with that 100%. So while we're talking points and projections, let's get into some fantasy talk. Rookie season coming up for Celebrini. How do you see his rookie season going for the people who are watching? I mean, obviously, we do fantasy sports at Dobber as well. Can you project his rookie season?
Man, it's tough
Yes,
because
putting you
he's
on the spot.
yeah, I mean, we saw what Bedard did, and I think that can be misleading because you could look at that and say, "Well, he should be able to get something like that." But the thing is, like, Bedard was never really asked to play defense, that was
Mhm.
never really something that was just go out there and do your thing. He was minus 44, not that you necessarily care about those kinds of things, but he didn't have to worry about that. And so 61 points in 68 games for Bedard, 74-point pace. I feel like Celebrini certainly could do that. The Sharks maybe have more talent around him than the Blackhawks. I think probably, depending on how things go for Smith and, does Couture play and what does the back end look like? So I don't know. It's probably going to be similarly ugly, but I don't think that Celebrini can disengage himself from the two-way aspect of the game. I don't think he's wired that way. Like he's not wired to just go try to score all the time. And so I feel like he's going to have to play a little bit more responsibly two-way, and that might mute his first year points. Like I think he's probably going to comfortably be somewhere between 55 and 65 point pace. I do think he can get more than that, but the Sharks are gonna be so bad, and I think that they're gonna want him to really play the right way and not just worry about points. Because I think also with Bedard, they kinda needed him to be the attraction, right? Like, let's get excited about Blackhawk hockey again. And the Sharks, I think, already have a lot of buzz between, drafting Celebrini and Will Smith coming. So I'm not sure that they need him to go ham and just score as much as possible, right? I think, and I think that can be good for him long term. Like adjust accordingly, like make sure you're responsible in your zone, all that kind of stuff. And I think they want to make sure that he's set up for long term success and not just having a strong first season. So I think I think if you put the over under probably at like 67, I'd probably take the under there.
67.
Yeah.
Ah, man, I would say that if you're a fantasy owner and you're lucky enough to be able to draft Celebrini this season, 67 points or even plus 60, plus 50, 60 points is a great rookie year. So that's great stuff for you
Mhm.
that by you there for sure. 50, 60 rookie point season is I think that's great. I would accept that from even some
Mhm.
veteran guys on some of my teams, man, 50, 60 points. So that's pretty good. Mm.
Yeah, but I
All
think it
right.
also means that if you're drafting in a redraft league, that's a pretty common to get, right? Like you can find guys that can hit that range. So
That's
I
true.
know a lot of people are drafting Bedard like in rounds, 3 and 4 last year. That's way too early for Celebrini, in my opinion. It was too early for him, quite frankly, I thought, even though he did pretty well for being drafted there. So that's what I'm thinking. A lot of
Yeah,
times you'll see a guy like even round 5, 6, that has like 70 plus point upside, and Celebrini does too, but they might be a little bit more likely. So I'm probably not gonna draft him redraft just because someone's gonna reach for him, and that's probably not gonna be me.
that's a great point. I haven't done a redraft league in a long time, so my brain automatically goes to dynasty or keeper, and
Yeah.
so I'm like, "Oh, you get a rookie with 50, 60 points. That's a great pick." But in redraft leagues, maybe not so much. That's a great point. So good that you brought that up. Uh, all right, Victor. I think that's going to do it for the second ever episode of Dobber Prospects YouTube show. Victor, where can people find you on X, and what do you have going on with Dobber that people can check out?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So you can find me on X or Twitter at Victor Nuño 12, VictorNuno 12. And at Dauber, I'm an editor there. So we're doing a lot of looking at the 32 and 32 series, looking at all the prospects and the teams. So definitely check that out. Pete and I obviously do the Dobber Prospects Report podcast together, and we're looking at organizational ranks right now. We're going to start looking at some other fantasy ranks. And then you can also find me over at Fantasy Hockey Life that I do with Jesse Severe, and we're doing team previews over the summer. We got like about 10 or so left. So definitely check that out over at Fan Hockey Life on Twitter. And yeah, let us know what you think of that. And thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate you taking the time. So that's going to do it for our second episode featuring Victor Nuno. Everybody have a good night, and we'll be back next week.